Welcome to all of our colleagues near and far to virtual adaptations of trauma-informed skills for educators. So some of us identify educators as classroom or a hallway or school or community, or those who are in the business of making sure that our young people feel seen and heard and loved and valued and witnessed. And that is how we are defining educators today. It is, in fact, November 17th. My name is Leora. I'll be hosting us today, and we're really, really grateful for Vivien Villaverde from University of Southern California to be joining us and leading us in learning. If you are just joining us, please feel free to put your name and your role and your location in the chat box, and do make sure that the dropdown is to panelists and attendees. I'm going to invite my colleagues Megan and Natalie to help remind everyone for that, so that we can be in communication with one another. We are the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, so we're a combo of the Northwest and the Pacific Southwest. I'll say a little bit about that in a second. We're really grateful for funding from SAMHSA. We are a SAMHSA funded project and funded center for you, and we also want to just name and know that all the opinions expressed in this session are of ours and of the presenter only, and do not always or necessarily reflect those of SAMHSA, although we're grateful for SAMHSA for leading so much of the trauma-informed work that a lot of this learning is based on. So let's just take a moment of pause. So November is Native American Heritage Month, which does not mean we do not identify and acknowledge the land that we are on and come from every other month of the year, but it is a month to acknowledge and to pay particular attention and honing. And we also know that next week is a week of gratitude, not only for if we're able to come together in safe and supportive ways, in connected ways, but also a time that offers us an opportunity to be aware and attuned about the land upon which we sit. And so we want to take a moment to have a land acknowledgement, because if we're talking about trauma-informed work, we know that we can't be trauma-informed without being racially just. We can't be trauma-informed without being culturally humble. And so our colleagues at the Northwest MHTTC are based in the University of Washington Smart Center, and they want to offer the acknowledgement that the Northwest MHTTC continues to learn and live and work on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people and all the Native people who may not be identified in that text. And we at the Pacific Southwest MHTTC are housed at the Center for Applied Research Solutions, which is in Sacramento, Santa Rosa, and Los Angeles. And so we honor the land of the Nisenan people and the 8 Cahuilla bands, and also the land of the Tongva peoples in Los Angeles. We want to just take a moment to ground ourselves. And I offer you in this moment, it's 3 p.m. here in California. It may be morning where you are in the Pacific Islands, or later in the evening across the country. I wanted just to offer you a moment to put both feet on the ground, if it's accessible to you, or something that connects you to the earth, and just to take a moment to just notice that you're held and you are supported by those who came before us and by the land that holds us up. I'm going to roll my shoulders and take an exhale. So speaking of land, and speaking of exhale, and speaking of resourcing, a couple more things before I transition it to Vivien. This is our hopefully famous map to you. If you're new to us, this is a new thing. If you're one of our partners, I see so many familiar names. You've seen this and you could probably do this yourself. This is our Mental Health Technology Transfer Center map. We are 10 regional centers across the country, founded in 2018 by SAMHSA to provide no-cost mental health and school mental health workforce development, evidence-based practices, culturally defined practices, and really lifting up the skills and knowledge and attributions of what it means to be a school mental health champion or a mental health champion, and interrupt the disparities and cultivate access to making sure that all of us want to live in this world. That's the simplest way to say it. And so we at the Pacific Southwest MHTTC are in the bottom green. We're Region 9. We serve the US Pacific Islands. I see some of you in the house. Shout out to you. Hawaii, California, Nevada, and Arizona. I'm proud to say that many of you, I think we have every single region covered in this chat box. And this is a combo effort with the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center with Region 10, who serves Alaska, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. And of course, because we're a network, we have all of you coming from across the country. And so even if you're not part of our center, you can absolutely engage in our learning. Okay, so here we are. We're in this, what we've been calling the West Coast party of the Interconnected Systems Framework. So if you are new to ISF, which is what it's called in short term, because all of us in the world of schools needs more acronyms. If you are new to ISF, ISF is a framework that bridges the world of school mental health and the world of multi-tiered systems of support under one framework. So this learning series is a learning series designed for us as educators to sit in learning about the systems and the services that really cultivate school mental health culture and climates in our schools, in our school districts, in our counties, and in our systems, and with our partners. So if you are new to ISF, please check out some of our fact sheets that our colleague Susan Barrett and many other colleagues wrote last year, and all of the webinars ever since, both the 101, 201, and 301 that we put together last year are the foundational modules for this body of work. Doesn't mean if you didn't check them out, you can't come and stay on today. Please do. Just means that they are resources for your continued learning as you're cooking your dinner or as you're engaging in a long drive or whatever you're doing. You can let us know and listen in. And here's where we are. So the purpose of our series is enhancing MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, integrating student mental health and wellness through systems, data, and practices, which is what leads us to today, talking about virtual trauma-informed practices, the always and now in the time of virtual schooling because of the pandemic and always. And we are in the very end of module 2. So we started with talking about ISF in virtual conditions. We were learning with Steve Hayden around secondary traumatic stress and educator well-being. We put that at the very top because that's foundational. We can't do any of this work without being seen ourselves. And then we are at the very end of ISF module 2. So we learned about the interconnected system framework and trauma-informed approaches with Susan Barrett. 2 weeks ago, I think, yes, the 5th, we were with Pamela Vanna, talking about psychological first aid. And today we're with Vivien to learn about virtual adaptations of trauma-informed skills for educators. So whether or not these are skills that you will practice or you might bring to someone to practice as a coach or thought partner, that is what we're concentrating our learning on. And just a preview that starting in December, we'll move into module 3, so interconnected systems framework. And what does that look like for tiers 2 and tiers 3? So for our young people, those that we serve who need both either intensive and targeted supports because of the needs that they carry. So if you are looking to continue your learning, please do join us. And then module 4 is on ISF and equity. So we'll have Steve come back to do a specific session on secondary traumatic stress and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, educators who identify in that with that term or that identity and their well-being. And I'm saying there because I don't identify as someone who's Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, but I do in allyship. And then we'll talk about what does all the systems work look like in the context of equity, and have a session on racial violence, trauma in schools on the 21st, and then come back together at the end of January for a town hall. So big stuff. I am seeing comments in the chat box to ask how to access all of our recordings, and I'm going to invite Megan and Natalie to help me answer those questions so that we can continue. But yes, it is completely an option to see all the PowerPoints and the recordings for all of our sessions. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So with all of this, none of this work can happen without coming to this learning in teams. And I really want to recognize those of you. I'm literally seeing some of your advancing wellness and resilience and education teams online today to think about the outcomes of this work, the data that informs us of our impact, the practices that lift up our outcomes, the systems that hold up our outcomes, And then the lens on equity around ensuring this work is rooted in not only behavior, not only in feelings, but also in needs, both in the now and in the historical. Okay, here we are, colleagues and friends. So we're going to start today's session. Before Vivien comes, oh, Vivien's on. Great, that's great. Stay on, stay on, stay on. You're great, you're great. We're actually going to offer you two polls, and then I'm going to introduce Vivien and bring it on. Give Vivien the baton is what I wanted to say. So we're going to do the first poll. It's going to come up on your screen. I'm launching it right now. And so because we're talking about virtual adaptations for trauma-informed educators, so we're asking you in just really as much as you would like to answer, have you participated in a Trauma 101 training in the past, in your lifetime? That could look like learning about brain science. You might hear the concept of the triune brain. That could look like going to a conference session on trauma-informed skills or services, or even listening to our friends Bruce Perry and Dan Siegel and Bessel van der Kolk on a podcast, like whatever that looks like to you. Okay, so we're gonna wait for about a 90%. So if more of you could answer, we're almost there. Thank you, thank you. Welcome, welcome. So we've got the poll up right now. And we are going to close voting in 2 seconds and end. I'm going to share the results. So here we are. Vivien, this is good data for you. We have a lot of knowledge on the line. So we've got about over around 85%, over 85% of the around 125 of us who, have participated in a trauma-informed 101. If you're not sure, there's about 7 of you that weren't sure. It's probably because it may not have been called that, but the content that Vivien is walking us through might be familiar. And if you're a new learner, beautiful. You're just where you need to be. You're just where you need to be. We're gonna do one more. So thanks for being with us here. So one more. And this question is, what role do you have with schools? So do you identify as an educator, as a classified staff, as a school resource officer, as an administrator, or as a support service staff? So a social worker, counselor, nurse. Other might be someone who is the director of emergency operations or school safety, custodian, cafeteria, food, nutritional services, grant administrator. There's a lot of folks who have miscellaneous titles. So please do take time to look, to check out our poll and to answer, well, how might you identify? Who do we have in the virtual world with us right now, in the virtual learning world? All right, so we'll end now. I just want to show you who's in the room. So we have a lot of support service staff, which is lovely because that usually means that you might be the folks leading professional development. You might be the folks who are supporting folks to do the work. And we're so grateful for those of you who are the administrators, the classified staff, the educators. And if you did identify as other, we don't want to disenfranchise you. Please feel free in the chat box to put what that other means to you, what roles that you're holding on to. Yeah, okay, great. So nonprofit organizations, youth advocacy, partners. So I'm seeing in the chat box, evaluators. Yes, I do know you are an evaluator and a good one at that. So in that other are the partners that we need to, as school leaders, school mental health champions, to partner with. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. So we've got county office folks, great. And we're going to spend some time today talking about virtual adaptations of trauma-informed practices for educators and skills. And I just wanted to offer one piece before I move into introducing Vivien and then hand over the mic, which is that we always know that there are some of you who are in this session as learners yourself, some of you in this session who are thinking about this work in your professional role, and some of you who are in this work to learn about how you might actually present this work. There are multiple ways for you to enter the learning, and all of them are good. So however you're in with us, you're in with us. Again, we can't see you or hear you, so please make sure to hydrate and move and and take care of yourselves in the session. I'm going to pass it over to Vivien, who's going to introduce herself and her center, and I'll come back on for our discussion. Vivien, we're so grateful for you. Please feel free to introduce yourself and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to close the poll. I think I could do that. Yes. And so I'm not sure if you guys can still see it, but good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for that enthusiastic welcome, Leora. I think I love how she set the tone for us in terms of the energy, and I definitely, I'm hoping to maintain that. And thank you for managing the PowerPoint as well. So my name is Vivien Villaverde, and I'm a clinical associate professor at the USC Suzanne DeVore Peck School of Social Work. And by training, I'm a school social worker. And so education, the school setting is a passion of mine. And I was with LA Unified School District as a psychiatric social worker for about 10 years. And I've always been a part of their collaboratives, meaning that although I'm employed by LA Unified, I was always housed in a child welfare office or a Department of Mental Health office. And so we work with students who are part of the child welfare system as well as the probation system. And we ended up doing a lot of program development and wraparound services for our foster care and probation youth. And I was the educational liaison for most of it and navigating the mental health, probation, as well as the education system collaboratively. And then I started working as a faculty in our School of Social Work. So I am still training, we are still training future social worker. And a majority of the time I spent with USC was working and partnering with schools and school districts. So currently I'm part of the Treatment Services and Adaptation Center, which is just like the MHTTC Center. So I know this is a lot of acronyms. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm, I'm identifying and defining the terminologies or the initials. So Treatment Services Adaptation Center is funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, which is part of the federal government. And so we are tasked to develop different evidence-based interventions that are geared towards delivery within the school system or the education system. And it is a partnership between USC, the RAND Corporation, as well as UCLA. And we have been around for about 30 years, and we are partnered with other SAMHSA-funded organizations. Next slide, please. And so if you have any questions, the website for it is traumaawareschools.org. Leora, if you don't mind adding that to the chat, traumaawareschools.org. So today we're going to start with the trauma-informed skills for educators, which is TISE. And so this is a training that was developed through our center, which is for short, the Treatment Services Adaptation Center. I'm going to just call it TSA. And it is developed with the intent of looking at sharing information about trauma as well as brain-based understanding of it, the prevalence, the impact, as well as developing or sharing strategies and skills that would assist in becoming more trauma responsive. So if you don't mind going to the next slide. Oh, I think, yeah, perfect. Learning objectives. So basically we have 3 learning objectives. We're together for a little bit over 60 minutes, and it's not a lot of time. We will review the trauma experiences and their prevalence, as well as the impacts on students' emotional, social, and academic functioning. We have a 2-part series that's already in their resource and in the website, and so I'll touch a little bit on that. And then we're also going to review some of the responsive skills, but we will review them with the learning remote adaptation or discussing remote adaptations and implications and considerations as we do that. So just to kind of really be, to be clear and to set the expectations, this training is for everyone. I've done this with mental health practitioners. We've done it with administrators. We've done it with community-based partners. But the goal is understanding the impacts of trauma on students and their learning, as well as understanding the different skills and strategies that could be used either for ourselves or to enhance our interactions with parents, but also to help share it with those who might be interacting to make sure that we are wrapping around students with individuals who are able to respond to their trauma needs, okay? Trauma support needs. Great. And so those are our 3 learning objectives for today. If you don't mind going to the, perfect, thank you so much. So with this, we are using, one of the things that we wanted to do to make sure that we do is how do we align the mental health language, which is our funding source, which is SAMHSA, with the educational language. So as much as we can, I saw that there are some individuals who are working with MTSS. We're trying to really align where does it where is it parallel, where does it intersect, and how can we use the anchors that the federal government has set in terms of what a trauma-informed system is, and use that as an additional lens that could be applied as you go about, enhancing, developing your MTSS, or if you're still in PBIS, so whatever infrastructure, educational infrastructure that you have, we want to share this cornerstones and guiding principles to see if you can infuse it with a trauma lens as you work, okay? The cornerstone of what we're gonna do today is to realize the prevalence and the impacts of trauma. So in terms of realizing trauma, we're gonna look at 2 aspects, the prevalence as well as the impacts on learning. And then the second one is recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma. And then the third one is responding by integrating trauma-informed principles to create safe and nurturing school climate. So how can we now transfer the knowledge that we have about the prevalence and the impacts of it and the ability to recognize them in our students into informing our responses to them. And the goal is to hopefully resist any kinds of traumatization by responding to them as needed. Okay, so these are the 4 cornerstones. So I'm going to do a quick review of the realize and the recognize, and we will focus more on the respond and the resisting re-traumatization. Thank you. Go ahead. So let's start with realizing the prevalence of trauma. Next, please. So here I'm giving you 2 types of definitions of what is trauma. I think most of you, 80+% of you have done a trauma training. So you have been exposed to these definitions. And then we have 2. One is by Van der Kolk and others, and they define trauma. That trauma arises from an inescapable stressful event that overwhelms an individual's coping mechanism. And then SAMHSA defines it as an individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or mentally or emotionally harmful and life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental and physical, social, emotional, and spiritual. So you can see there are 2 things, there are several things that I want to highlight, that the event is actually perceived as threatening, and that it is also taxing to or harmful to one's functioning. And so those are the things that I kind of wanted to highlight as we go about that. And then if you don't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. And so what we want to highlight as well is that stress or adverse experiences or experiences in general comes in a continuum. As an individual, a mild to moderate level of stress is actually good for us. It has its function. It drives us. It keeps us motivated. It keeps us engaged. But in terms of the trauma work that we're talking about, we are going to concentrate or focus on the harmful one, which is more on the other side of the other end of the spectrum, which is from and that severe side of it, the severe spectrum or the severe end of that stress. And so again, with that, these are sudden threats of injury or death. Person is terrified, horrified, or helpless. And again, because we are talking about the severity of the experience, then it is taxing that individual's ability to cope with it, or it is interrupting their ability to function. And that is what the area, the locus of, the focus of our talk today. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. So just a general review again, we are going to talk about the different types of trauma. We have acute. Acute trauma are those events that happen on a one-time basis. I just want you to kind of pause a little bit. All of us come in with some sort of history of experiences and whatnot. So think about for yourself, what kinds of acute trauma experiences you might have been exposed to in the past or in the more recent past. So these are one-time events. They don't last in duration. And examples of these are car accidents, potential disasters, earthquakes and things like that, fires. But those things are also changing in nature because some of them are becoming more recurrent. But also some violent experiences, such as negative experiences of being victimized and things like that. Next one, please. And then we have our chronic trauma. Chronic traumas are trauma related to events that occur repeatedly over time. I think that there are climate-related experiences that we have that is sort of bordering on becoming more of a chronic trauma. And then we can also talk about domestic violence. We can talk about some child abuse or living in communities where there's high violence, where there's repeated exposure or potential victimization. So these are the what we're discussing when we're referring to, when we refer to them as chronic trauma. And then we have our complex trauma. So complex traumas results from an invasive interpersonal experience with caregiving being the source of the trauma. So they are early onset trauma that occurs on many levels over time within the caregiving system. So it's really, really insidious because the source of the trauma or the perpetrator of the trauma is a trusted system. And then sometimes when another system tries to support and assist, that secondary system could potentially re-victimize again and expose that individual to a second trauma or a third trauma. And so as we can see, there is a consistent exposure experience of it, and some examples of it are neglect, physical abuse, and other events of an invasive interpersonal nature. So that's what complex trauma is. And again, I'm giving you quick reviews of the different types of trauma, and in this particular part one of our TISE training today. Great. That is the part in terms of what I want to highlight about the complex trauma is because it is the trusted caregiving system that has perpetrated that particular adverse experience. So next, please, the intergenerational trauma. You did it. I'm so sorry. So intergenerational trauma are traumas related to cumulative physical, psychological, and social wounding over the lifespan and across generations, resulting from massive traumatic events or experienced as a group. This type of trauma can be passed on, big scale like the Holocaust or slavery, and it can also be experienced within the smaller communities. And so you've probably heard of the terms of intergenerational experience of poverty and things like that. And so those are, that's another type of potential historical or intergenerational trauma. Okay. Feel free to share on the chat box if you have other definitions about these 4 types of trauma that you've heard in the past, or if you want to share some perspectives and points of view about them. Okay, and then I want to transition, knowing the different types of traumas, now I want to transition to discussing or highlighting the different groups that are more vulnerable to them because of particular situations or circumstances. So there are groups that are more vulnerable to higher rates of trauma exposure, and some of the research have shown that some vulnerable groups are 4 times more likely to experience trauma or adverse childhood experiences. Okay, so that would be one, children from under-resourced community. There's several research that have been done more recently, where they have looked at socioeconomic status as well as experiences of adverse events in childhood. And what they found is that they're more likely to be exposed to gang violence, community violence, and this has been found to be true not just in urban areas, but in rural areas as well. So more recent research have talked about poverty being the mitigating factor, where an individual, a child or a family, is more likely to be exposed to higher adverse experiences because of being a part of a community that is in poverty or under-resourced, okay? And then there's also higher probability or higher risk for child abuse, juvenile justice encounters or interactions. And these are because of the different difficulties, burden of not having the resources to meet basic needs, but as well as those secondary particular hardships and situations that they're exposed to because the community does not have a lot of resources. Okay, so then we talk about children whose parents, caretakers, have an alcohol or drug dependency. If you look at this one, ACEs have found that there is, I'll talk a little bit about the ACEs study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And this is one of the risk factors that have been found to be connected to negative health outcomes. And one of the things that we also, want to share with you is that children with one or more parents with substance dependency are twice more likely to experience either physical abuse, emotional abuse, or sexual abuse. And so there is more exposure and potential victimization for our students in this type of situation. Okay, and then we have our LGBTQIA+ youth marginalization and vulnerabilities. So our students who has LGBTQIA connection might be put in situations where there's institutional as well as family reactions that is marginalizing them. And it exposes them to potential physical abuse, verbal victimization, rejection, which could lead them to isolation from families as well as friends. And not just that, the institutions that are supposed to help them might be the ones that are potentially marginalizing them, making them more vulnerable to be exposed to trauma experiences and exposure. Okay. So next, please. Oh, no. So students in special education is the last one before we move on to the next slide. This is another vulnerability that we want to share with you. They have found that children who are in special education are more likely to be victimized in terms of bullying, as well as verbal, physical, and sexual abuse. And of course, I did skip one important vulnerability, which is immigrant and refugee students with and without legal status. So what research has found is that 79% of immigrants had experienced a traumatic event before migration, such as witnessing violence, witnessing killings, being assaulted, suffering. So there are several caveats that I want you to look at when you're looking at this particular group that is vulnerable. We want to look at what types of violent exposures experiences have they been exposed to while migrating from the country of origin to where they are at now and before they reach the destination. And then we want to look at the ones who are here. Some of these students might have family members who might not have legal status. And again, that type of experience creates a lot of uncertainty. And so these students might be exposed to bullying as well and being victimized. But then there's this consistent and repeated level of uncertainty that family members might not be there when they come home. As you can see, there's a chronic nature to that particular situation. So 25% of immigrant children reported being treated unfairly by peers and 14% by adults because of who they are. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to share some of the startling data that we have here. So as you can see, there's data in terms of the rates. 58% have been exposed to, on my screen it's a little bit small, the PowerPoint, so I'm trying to make it big so I can read the numbers. I apologize. So 58% have been exposed to violence, and I'm going to have you look at data. And then we have this one is done in it's a big scale study that's done in I think it's sixth grade population. For some reason, I'm not recalling the actual grade level, but this is a big scale LA Unified study that was done. And what they found is that 94% of the students from the second largest district in the United States have been exposed to one type of violence, either victimized or exposure to any kinds of violence. So that's almost 9.55 out of 10 students. So that is a very significant data that you have. And then we have our ACEs. And so I think, I don't know if everybody has heard of it. And so a doctor in Kaiser in San Diego was interested in looking and examining some of the adult health issues that is coming to the clinic, and they wanted to understand or link it to what leads to that type of negative health outcomes. And so what they found is that there is a cluster of childhood experiences that can predict a negative health outcome for adults. And so those were clustered into having a family member with a substance abuse or drug dependency in the house, domestic violence, and other types of adverse experiences. And so what they found is that 25% of adults who grew up with a household with a parent that abused drugs are more likely to experience negative health outcomes, such as chronic diseases, as well as mental health and other outcomes. And so 25% had a parent with a mental illness, and then 25% had experienced physical abuse, and 1/6 of the population studied had 4 or more ACEs. And so this study was mostly done on white, middle class population. And so since then, multiple studies have expanded this and looked at communities of color as well as other minorities and looked at potential adverse experiences that would, could potentially connect with a negative health outcome. And then I want to add here, Bryant and et al. Just published an article. There are not a lot of hard data yet available in terms of the pandemic and connection to COVID in terms of increase in potential adverse childhood experiences, but there are emerging studies and data that are being collected right now that is pointing in that direction. And that is particularly concerning when it comes to partner abuse, as well as underreporting of child abuse and neglect, but potential increase in actual incidences. Okay, so the state of California is one of the ones that are kind of in a unique situation because we have a new Surgeon General, and they are actually starting to institute a pediatric ACEs screening tool for all clinics in the state. And so we're going to see what data is going to be collected with that. Okay, so in terms of the prevalence, we want to, sort of show that it is a concerning data that we have, and that there are a lot of research that points to the existence of this particular issue in our communities and in our schools in particular. Thank you. So in the chat box, if you don't mind, if you could just show what are some of the common stressful and or traumatic experiences among your students. Think that you've heard students tell you, maybe other people in your communities tell you, like, what are the most common ones? Because one of the things that we want to point out with this, so go ahead and start chatting them if you don't mind. Thank you. We want to make sure that we are contextualizing, you know, this within the community that you're in. Having done this in different parts of the country, having done this in other countries as well, we're realizing that some of these experiences are very specific to a particular group, to a particular neighborhood. I can't even tell you, like, one city could have multiple, like, different things. And so we've done this in the East Coast and in the South, where hurricanes are, you know, the repeated hurricanes is sort of changing, and the repeated flooding is changing the experience of chronic versus acute. And then here in California, FARS is becoming more of a chronic repeated incident rather than those isolated. And again, a lot of the new studies on ACEs, and I love it, everybody's talking about it, the poverty, I see that, and homelessness. So poverty is something that is being researched more, and based on my own search of the data, I've seen within the last 3 years updates on this particular information and how it's being directly connected to an increased experience of childhood adversities. Okay, thank you. And some I've seen that are also kind of acute in nature, but again, what I want to point out is, though, we acknowledge that the prevalence is there, but we also want to acknowledge that, you know, just like what Leora said in terms of engaging in culture humility, letting the community define it, the experiences for us is that understanding what is present in your own community. And with that, I'm going to transition to our next one. So if Leora, if you don't mind, I'm going to get out of my chat so I can see the PowerPoint. So with that, we talked about the first aspect of realizing, which is knowing the prevalence of trauma. And so now we're going to go into the actual impacts of trauma. Okay. So next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to talk about this one, this particular definition and quote by Paul Till. So, over the past decade, neuroscientists have determined how severe and chronic stress in childhood leads to physiological and neurological adaptations in children that affect the way their minds and bodies develop and the way they function in school. And so what I wanted to point out is that they are claimed, the neuroscientists and the data is showing that there are changes in the architecture of the brain that then puts them at a disadvantage in meeting the functions that's required of them within the schools and within their day-to-day. And so I want you to kind of, I want to highlight that, but then I also want to highlight that as the trauma experience kind of create that potential adaptation, I also want us to look at there are things too that we can do. That's why we're all involved and engaged in this work, because there are things and responses that we can do in order to interrupt that re-architecturing and support normal functioning again, okay? So I'll talk about that more, but I just wanted to make sure that we're highlighting that. Although it has the CDC in their vital signs report, the Center for Disease Control on ACEs also talks about that it could potentially. And so that's why I think it is imperative for us to understand the prevalence and also to realize the impacts of it so that we can respond and resist re-traumatization, and also potentially support the mitigation and the reversal of these adaptations, okay? So I just wanted to kind of share, this is a quick review of the response system that we have when it comes to stress. And so we have the prefrontal cortex, which is engaged in the thinking, the planning, organizing, analyzing. That's the part of the brain that's involved in the stress response. And then we have the hippocampus. The hippocampus is then involved in the memory, as well as emotional regulation, okay? And then we have the amygdala. The amygdala is the one that's more in the back of the brain, and this is what is usually referred to as the survival brain. The prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus is referred to as the thinking brain. So the amygdala is then engaged in the fight or a survival response, or the part of the brain that helps regulate chemical reactions to fear. So when there is something that is life-threatening that happens, the amygdala is activated, and this is the one that then decides whether we need to fight, flight, or freeze. And so this is the part of the brain that helps us respond to all kinds, the real emergencies and fears that we might be encountering. So together with the amygdala and the prefrontal and the hippocampus working together, so I want you to think of a car accident potentially. So as we get into a car accident, which I have been in personally, my initial reaction has been to freeze. And so with that, my amygdala is activated, and to protect myself, and my immediate reaction was that freezing. But because this is an acute experience for me, then slowly but surely, although it feels like it's a long, long time, my thinking brain starts analyzing the situation, and then the hippocampus starts helping me regulate the emotion. And so together, as a stress response, I'm able to respond to that in that particular situation in a more balanced and regulated way. I might be frozen for a little bit, but then, you know, minutes after, I can engage in a conversation with whoever I'm in the accident with to make sure that we're okay and that we're exchanging information. So as you can see, there's a balancing of each of these components of the trauma response. So typically in a stress response or survival brain response, the scary event happens. I'm using my cursor to point to it, but then I don't think you can see it. And then the amygdala produces that signal and overrides the frontal lobe, which is then the thinking brain. And then we react to it right away. We respond to it as needed to make sure that we're safe and we're okay. And that's our fight or flight. And then along with the amygdala, the hippocampus also helps create a potent memory of that. So then we're actually storing these memories of survival responses to keep us safe. So the change brought about in the brain as a stress reaction are helpful in the immediate face of danger. But remember, I talked about the stress continuum and that we are on the severe end of it. So if you don't mind going to the next slide. So a brain impacted by complex or chronic trauma is then, we have the trauma event, and then we have potential reminders or the repeated trauma experiences and adverse experiences. And then our amygdala then produces that alarm every time that happens. And then it overrides, again, the frontal lobe, which is the thinking part of the brain. Sometimes it's a false alarm, sometimes it's not. And then we then experience this crisis response, which is the fight, flight, or freeze. The hippocampus, but the problem with this, when we're looking at the complex trauma, what potentially could be problematic is that if this is done in a repeated manner, then that means that our amygdala is the one that's the primary response to external stimuli. And so this is activated, and then what happens is that it is the muscle that is being trained to respond constantly. And so remember, when the amygdala is activated, our frontal lobe, which is our thinking brain, is then, it overrides it, and it's not functioning as well as it should be. And so if this is the repeated response system, then what happens is that same reactions on a prolonged basis can impair the use of the prefrontal cortex as well as the use of the hippocampus, which is then now, which is helpful in regulating memory as well as emotions. And so, and indiscriminate fear. This can be seen as an adaptive response in living in an unsafe home or a community. And so when we're working with traumatized individuals, we are then looking at those who are constantly in their survival brain, their fight or flight. It is constantly because they're waiting for that ball to drop. And so I want you to kind of pause a little bit and think about some of the individuals that you're working with, whether it might be a parent or a student, and some of them who might be reacting to events either in the classroom or in your virtual classroom that are a little bit disproportionate and unexpected. So are they potentially reacting to this and sort of reliving the trauma experiences that they might have? Okay. I share this because I think this is a great resource. If the link is there, so please watch it on your own. I'm going to move on to the second part. So if you don't mind, Leora, I think they're going to get the copy of this PowerPoint. This is a short video that is really amazing in terms of brain development and brain development in children and trauma. So in the beginning, we talked about our first R. We talked about realizing it, understanding the prevalence of it, understanding the impacts on the individual. And so how do we then recognize it? I'm going to talk about this briefly too, so go ahead if you don't mind moving to the signs and symptoms. And so what I want you to I want to highlight here is that a lot of our interactions with individuals who are potentially exposed to chronic trauma and traumatized, what we see are the observable behaviors that they might have. But it's easy to forget that there are underlying psychological stress, individual or issues, youth culture, community and environmental stressors, as well as family influence. So as you can see, what we see with our, the naked eye and our interactions are those reactions and potential trauma reactions that they might have, but what we're not seeing are the potential causes for them. Like, what are those underlying things? What are the things that we don't know? And we're not taking the time exploring so that we can appropriately support those individuals who are exposed to trauma. Okay, so there are 4 types of trauma: cognitive, emotional, behavioral. And so with this, we're looking at potential difficulties analyzing information, potential difficulties looking, being able to organize, time manage. And then we're also looking at potential emotional symptoms. And with that, we're looking at emotional, potential anxiety, potential depressive symptoms, and as well as PTSD-like symptoms. And then on the behavioral side of it, we're looking at oppositional defiant behaviors potentially, as well as different behavior in terms of disproportionate hypervigilant reactions to stimuli or to events that are happening around them. And then we're also looking at physical reactions. And with the physical reactions, we're looking at potentially somatization of some of the experiences and stressors that they have, such as stomach aches, headaches, and then exacerbation of chronic illnesses that they might have as well, such as asthma and other respiratory diseases. And so here, I just wanted to demonstrate what are the cognitive functionings that are impacted when somebody's exposed to chronic trauma or complex trauma. And so I wanted to ask again, that's okay. So I just wanted to look at the concentration. Again, these are all prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain functions that are challenged. As we look at this, these are the 2 things that I kind of want to leave you with, but I'm not going to take so much time on this because I want to move on to the strategies. What are the potential trauma impacts you're observing in your students? And as you interact with caregivers as well, what are those potential trauma impacts that you might be seeing or observing in your caregivers as well? So I want you to sort of kind of reflect on this as we move on to the training. So now that we've looked at realizing the prevalence and the impacts of trauma and recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma, I want to move into the strategies. I want to look at how do we then respond as well as resist re-traumatization. So we're going to look at potentially responding and what are the principles that we can apply into responding and the lens that we're going to use in order to assess how we're incorporating the knowledge about trauma into our practices so that we can resist re-traumatization. Thank you. So this is another SAMHSA trauma approach guiding post that we can use as we look at evaluating or as we look at assessing the different practices and responses that we might have currently. So looking at the principles of a trauma-informed system, these 6 principles are really useful in anchoring whatever it is that we're going to do and how we're going to apply this knowledge. We want you to always prioritize looking at safety. Safety is really important because, again, looking at the brain science that we discussed earlier, you can see that they're in their survival brain. So how do we calm down that survival brain and create a sense of calm and safety so that they would be able to connect with us? and not relive the trauma that they might be, that they have experienced. And then we also want to look at trust and transparency. Are we very clear with them? Are we trying to be as transparent as possible? Are the expectations clear? Are we providing them with an environment where they are able to, that they know they're safe, and that it is an entity that they could trust, that they're not going to be victimized? And so looking at that. And then peer support. Are we nurturing that? Are we looking at us promoting a sense of belonging? Are we creating an environment, or whatever it is that we're doing? Are we assessing, again, opportunities for support, opportunities for connection, opportunities for a belonging, for a sense of belonging? So again, looking at these principles so far, we are looking at that survival brain and trying to connect with that survival brain, no matter what your role is within the school. So this information is really helpful, because how trauma informed are you in your practices as you maintain the role that you have? We're not asking you to be the mental health practitioner for the student, and vice versa. And so, but within your own interactions, how are you applying these principles of being trauma informed? And then we're looking at collaboration and neutrality. Are you giving value to the voice of others, the students? I know I'm going back to the students all the time, just because that is the focus of the population focus that we have. But as you work with other adults in supporting this particular student, are you mutual in your partnership and your collaboration, and are you giving each other input and acknowledging the value of what everyone is bringing to the table? And then empowering voice and choice. As much as possible, are you soliciting inclusion and participation from the students themselves, from the family, and any of your other collaboration? Where it's possible, are you giving them the voice to define what the experience is and to really define what their needs are, and participate in whatever it is programming and development that you're doing, as well as choices? So as much as you can, you want to provide choices if we're looking to be more trauma responsive. And then lastly, which I think should be first, but this is the order that they have it, but cultural humility. And I'm not just talking about ethnic or racial, but whatever community that you're going to be working with, whatever component, are we looking at letting that particular group define for us what their experiences is like, and how we're going to be best, or how we can best support that particular experience of that community. So I want you to pay attention to this, because this is a thread that we're going to run through all of the rest of the skills and strategies that we're going to discuss. Here we're going to talk about resilience and the value of relationship building. And we're going to talk about classroom climate. We're going to talk about trauma-informed communication, trauma-informed de-escalation, as well as trauma-informed staff and collaboration. So I'm going to focus on the first three. I'll talk briefly about the second two, because I really want to, share more information about this, about those three strategies, the first three strategies. But I also want to demonstrate how you run the principles of being trauma-informed into all of these different strategies. Okay? So resilience and relationship. So I want to, I think everybody has, sort of encountered resilience, and this is something that has been discussed, and probably you've attended trainings where resilience has been defined or identified. So resilience is defined as the ability to effectively cope with and adapt to or overcome adversity, stress, and challenges that we experience. So as we look at this, as we, So we want to look at resilience in terms of how do we help our students bounce back? What are the things that we need to do as adults and working with individuals and families to help them bounce back and face the different adversities that they might encounter? So we want to look at protective factors. We want to look at individual assets. Those are internal assets that they might have. Sometimes when an individual is in chaos, they're not able to see their own strengths. So we might have to play a big role in helping them remind them of the different internal strengths that they might have. And so as the objective individual who's not in the middle of the chaos, this might be clearer for us versus that individual who is in the middle of all these chaotic experiences. And so then resources. We also, want to identify another protective factor, which are the resources. These could be external, the positive things about their community, about their culture, whether it's ethnic or racial based or not, the community that they have, the family, any other adult or any other institution that might be a source of support for them. So these are the different external resources or external factors that we could look at and potentially identify if it's already there or connect our families with if it's not there. And then I want to focus on the second part of, this strategy is that all of you are in this work because you're so vested in supporting individuals and families who are in distress. And so we want to point out the value of that relationship, the value of what you're doing, the value of your connection has a healing factor. It has a positive, supportive, and social relationship. It acts like an antidote. Remember, we talked about Paul Toe's definition of those adaptations. And so that survival brain is constantly activated. So that relationship that we have, and if you're using the principles that we've discussed earlier, the safety, transparency, being culturally, humble, as well as empowering choice and voice, if you create a kind or foster or nurture that kind of a relationship, so we're looking at really calming the survival brain and giving that individual the opportunity, that stress response system, the opportunity to reconnect back to the frontal lobe as well as the hippocampus, then that helps with, again, being able to think, analyze the situation, as well as regulate the memory. And so just like any other muscle, we have, this particular individual who's in distress, the amygdala muscle is used so much that it becomes stronger than the prefrontal and the hippocampus. So with this relationship investment, providing that safe environment where they could help reconnect it back, we're actually making the prefrontal cortex as well as the hippocampus stronger again, so that we would have a balanced stress response. And then what we're also doing with the relationship, the positive relationship, is that we're providing opportunities for individuals to release oxytocin. And oxytocin has its healing factors, and it really helps in connecting the prefrontal and calming down the survival brain as well. And so the more opportunities to have to reconnect the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, the more opportunities they have to be able to analyze situations in front of them rather than responding with their survival brain. So we want to communicate to students they are safe and they belong. We want to help resculpt the brain and re-architect it back to where it should be, helping the students to turn down the survival brain and engage the thinking brain and the emotional regulation brain as well. So we want to also use the interactions that we have to model safe and trusting relationships. So I just wanted to kind of, I talked about this earlier as I was talking about the relationship. I wanted to kind of remind you of the illustration of it. And this is just some data and statistics in terms of improvement when there's positive adult relationship. And I think this is not new to you. You guys have, all of us are in this because we want to create these opportunities, but knowing how powerful it is, I think informs how much more we can leverage it. And so what are the considerations? And I think this is the challenging part because we're doing it here. We're doing it in such a different way. So how do we, what are the remote considerations for protective factors? How do we activate? So we need to be engaged in active observation, minding it, cultivating it. So how do we find opportunities? How do we really point out strengths, potential strengths, skills that they're using? I know in my teaching, although I teach adults, sometimes they assist me. And I want to make sure that I'm highlighting that. And I also look for potential successes, whether it's tiny successes, random successes, or huge successes. I really want to highlight that because, again, I pay attention to how they talk to each other. I pay attention to some of the stories that they're telling because then if I can find a strength, a skill, or success there, then I can help mine that and cultivate it. And then resources, knowing and understanding what additional supports they might need to help them succeed, whether it's partnering with the parents or tapping into other resources in the community or in your organization so that we can provide them with that external additional support and connect them as needed. And then, of course, in terms of relationship building and, how to be creative. The virtual setup, I invest in my background. So this is one thing that I want to make sure it's calm, inviting, clean, and it's not too busy. And I've been to meetings where it's just too busy and it was harder. And then you have the cameras, the individual names, aliases, pronouns, and whatnot. And then we have frequent feedbacks, reactions, and looking at potential creative connections, being available to them before or after class. I do this a lot just to make sure that everybody feels comfortable before or after class. Unique greetings, you might want to individualize it. Looking at chat, so I've asked Leora to really monitor the chat because it's hard for me to do both. And also I have created breakout rooms. I've done fun breakout rooms as well just to kind of support that. And then apply trauma-informed principles. This is the lens. So whatever it is that you're going to do, ask yourself, is this safe? Is this transparent? Is it empowering? Is it culturally humble? All these things, because that's my anchor, whatever it is that I'm doing. So in your chat box, I also provided some resources. All the activity, self-reflection, I added resources that you could potentially use. So on the chat box, if you could just kind of briefly, what are creative ways have you nurtured a remote relationship with your students or with your clients? My students are in different remote organizations providing either case management, clinical work. So they have been very, very creative in how they're building rapport and engaging their clients or students in this relationship building. Okay, and I think Leora is monitoring that. And so just, give yourself some time to kind of reflect on that. So we've done resilience. And so Leora, we're going to move on to the classroom climate. So what is the rationale for this? We want to make sure that we're creating a safe and calm environment, which is essential for learning. Again, if our brains are in the survival mode, our thinking brain is not engaged and they're not going to be able to process information and do what they need to do, or we ourselves are in the same boat. So true for all students, but particularly important for students with trauma histories. We need to make sure that we're creating a climate where their survival brain are given the opportunity to calm down so that they can engage their thinking brain. So some points that I want to make sure that we are paying attention to: classroom setup. Is it psychologically or physically safe? Is it planned out, or are we in chaos all the time? There's no routine. Are we transparent, predictable? Are the expectations clear? And the process is clear? Do they know what to expect? And do they know what to expect if something goes wrong? Can they rely that there is a safety net, there's a plan? So I love these two pictures that I have of the classroom because they have signs on the calendar. What are the hourly, sort of transitions that they have? Information, and it's welcoming. And then also we're looking at subject matter. What are you going to talk about with what is topic of conversation? Whether it's a group or a classroom setting, are you giving them ample enough time to process what you're going to be talking about that day? Whether it's all about assaults or war, anything like that, or being a veteran, and things like that. So some of those subject matters could be reminders for some of the students or the individuals that we're talking to, or we're going to be interacting with. And so are we, giving them ample enough warning to prepare themselves? Or are we also being sensitive that they might need some time out from that conversation because it's just too heavy? Do you have positive messaging? So you can see I have some of those. And I love the bottom picture where it has dream big. And then you can do it. The cultural humility, that diversity picture that we have. Then trauma reminders and events. So we want to be, so I have a colleague who works with Broward County, and so Valentine's Day is such a hard day for the entire school. So they are constantly making sure that they're planning for that and they're providing additional supports when certain reminders. So that's why we really like to invite you to contextualize some of the information contextualize it within the uniqueness of your communities, because those reminders are going to be different. Okay, peer-teacher and peer-to-peer interaction. Remember, one of the cornerstones of being trauma-informed is that peer support. And so as teachers, are we supportive of each other to make sure that we are, going to be able to meet the needs of our students? And then how are we fostering that peer-to-peer positive interactions? And then self-regulation opportunities. These are opportunities to teach relaxation techniques or to help our students transition from activities, or have the opportunity to get timeouts when they need to. So in a regular class, it'd be having calm corners, mindfulness room, grounding exercises, and this with my classroom. Leora did it in the beginning, which is amazing. When she grounded us in being thankful and acknowledging the land, I really like that because it kind of grounded us in the moment. But I also learned something from Dr. Howard from UCLA, checking in with my student, how are you feeling today? And I only want one word, and we've done that. And then we also look at grounding and mindfulness, practices. So remote considerations, invest in and leverage the positive relationship. So that relationship, so all of these things are interconnected. You need to invest in that relationship, positive relationship building, so that we can anchor creating that safe climate. Include students in building class processes. If you can, I've done a class constitution and I teach graduate students, and I also have them create a conflict management plan. I do this in the beginning of all my classes so that we're all in agreement and that they've contributed to that particular plan. Virtual background, signage, reactions, processes, pacing, transition, communications, sharing. What is an empowering way to let them share? Do they raise their hands, the blue hands, their reaction hands, or how do you do that? So making sure that's defined. Activity transitions, mindfulness activities, breathing exercises before and after activities. And if you're noticing your classroom starting to escalate, how do you engage in that? And then frequent virtual environmental scan. I'm pretty observant, so I like it. So I really encourage my students to be on camera, because then I'm seeing, is it too dark? Are they not participating? Is there something going on in the background? And so I learned to live with some of the distraction, because I'd rather see where they're at, so then I can make the adjustments as needed. And again, the grounding exercises. And so I've given you different mindfulness resources as well, but I also want you to take the time right now to reflect on this too. What creative ways have you fostered a safe, calm, and engaging virtual classroom? It could be activities that you've done. It could be things that you have, you might have engaged in, or ways that you have designed your virtual classroom. So with that, I want to move into the communication. So with the communication, we'll do the communication. And so one of the most important things that you want to do when you're looking at engaging in a trauma responsive is learning how to attune, or really paying attention to how you're attuning with them. Are you validating them? Are you acknowledging their feelings, their individuality? Leora did such an amazing job of this in the beginning. From the moment you guys entered the classroom, the way she's engaging with everyone through the chat, that is an excellent, excellent example of attuning to the audience. I've seen how you as a group decided that your location is important, and that's the thread that came up. And so she adjusted to that and acknowledged that and made it a point to really talk about that. So that itself is that type of adjustment and attunement that, I'm encouraging, because she listened to how you guys are defining it and make sure it's safe and everyone felt validated, and she's constantly expressed expectations and things and such, okay? And then we want to look at reflections too. How are you communicating back? Simple reflections are when you communicate exactly how you heard them, and just to clarify what they said. Or you could, create an assumption of what they might be feeling and just acknowledging that, but then giving them the opportunity to agree to it or not and let you know. But you could also do a double-sided reflective communication where you're highlighting the confusion, the conundrum, or the dilemma. On the one side, you feel this way. On the other side, you feel this way. So those are the different ways that you could do that. So here are more attuning virtually. It is more challenging. We know that, so less able to gauge the body language. But when the camera is on, I'm able to kind of do that to a degree. I know when the lighting is dark that there's something might be not on. I know when my student is engaged and my student is not. So you have to really mind those, and it's active minding that you have to do. So allow the students to use the chat. Make it safe. The way Leora did it was amazing. But then at the same time, you have to really monitor it. So it's something that you have to hone into because when you're teaching or when you're interacting, you're most likely by yourself. So you want to make sure that you're slowly getting used to paying attention to different things. So general remote considerations: tone, volume, cadence, speed, body language. So visual and auditory cues. Virtual environmental scan. I look what's around my student whenever I know where they're at. I can kind of get certain clues. We're in the kitchen or who's going to be in and out. And then I'm also constantly thinking of creative ways to add engagement activities. The internet has tons of them. And so I, feel free to mind them. There's just so many resources that are coming out right now from different organizations, especially educational organizations. And so this is another reflection. What are the creative ways you have attuned or communicated remotely with your students? And I think this is a consideration now with parents. And some of you are in different community-based organizations, and this is something that you are you're doing as well. So think about all of this, and if you could chat it, that would be great. If not, take note of it for yourself as well. And so we're in our last two strategies. We've done the classroom, the relationship, the climate, as well as the communications. If we could go to the next two slides. And so one thing that I want to point out just with this, there's this whole series on self-regulation as well as taking care of ourselves. We cannot attune, we cannot interact with traumatized or individuals who might be using in their survival brains if we're not going to be coming from a place of calm. So this is one thing that I want to stress here. We need to reflect. We need to acknowledge our own burdens, our own demands, our stresses and struggles, so that we can be ready. We have to engage in our own grounding techniques for ourselves, mantras, sort of positive thoughts and affirmations so that we can approach whatever situation that we have in that calm way. Because the only way that we can interact with students to help regulate or help at least connect with them is if we're regulated ourselves. And then what I want to say about this one, student regulation, is that if you're noticing your student is revving up, tap into the other skill sets that you might have, other trainings that you've done. They sponsored the psychological first aid responding to student in crisis. And so that's another thing that you can look at. Just like you would ground yourself, you want to, anchor yourself in how you could ground your students as well. If you need to pause in your interactions because you need to engage in a relaxation or mindful activity, please do that. So model, this is one thing that is, when we know we're regulated, we can model that. And there's an emotional contagion that could happen and our students would calm down themselves. So when you get the PowerPoint, you'll get this reflections as well. Some of the things that might be helpful to you. So in terms of collaboration, this is the one that I'm going to stress because, again, we can't be in this alone. You need to look at what are the infrastructures your school are developing for administrators to support educators and staff, and what are the infrastructure that could be put in for staff and educators themselves could support each other, and how can we work together and support our wellness, also support our successes and exploration of different things and different remote conversions that we need to do, as well as understanding resources. I've given you some communications sent by a school, know what your schools are sending to their students or the community so that you're aware of them. These are different examples of resources that I found, and a grounding sort of, reflection. What are your schools? What are other teachers doing to kind of reflect? Because all of us are building the plane as we're flying the plane right now. PFA pointed this out, and so we're in this situation. So we're all in this together, and so we need to be able to support each other. And with that, I want to welcome, quick questions. I'm not sure, how you want to handle it, Leora. I apologize for going over.
Okay, Vivien, it's a lot of content. So I think we need to, in respecting everyone's time, we want to make sure that we come into a close. But the good news is this is a series. And the other good news is that Pamela and Vivien are coming back on December the 3rd. 5th, 3rd one. I'll get to it in a second. And so when we're talking about tier 2 and tier 3, what we may ask you, Vivien and Pamela, to do is to mirror not only student strategies, but also educator strategies so that we can talk about the culture and the school system of collaboration and moving into resisting and responding. So on that note, Vivien, I want to thank you. I know that was a lot to move through and hold, especially when you can't see folks and you're also calibrating multiple folks' funds of knowledge. I'm going to invite you to go off video and mute yourself as I close us. So again, please join me in the chat box to thank Vivien and to appreciate the work that that USC has really done to help codify this conversation. I want to welcome any questions or feedback that came up, and Vivien has provided their information, both Vivien and Pamela's, for the Treatment Services Adaptation Center for Schools, which is an NCTSN site, so National Child Traumatic Stress Network site. And I have the job of closing us in 2 minutes. So hang on tight with me, folks, because there's good stuff coming up. So number one is that we always want to recommend, and Vivien has given really lovely team meeting planning conversation question fodder. So please join the upcoming sessions as a team, then follow up with one another. What resonated, what needed more inquiry, maybe what didn't resonate, how might you need further technical assistance? That's how we can support you in moving this forward. You will be able to check out their center and also the guide around interconnected systems framework that holds this work. I also wanted to point out, you may or may not know this, but we released, and the link is at the very bottom. I'm hoping Megan can drop it in the chat box, but the link is at the very bottom. We released a virtual learning guide for facilitators. For those of you, many of you are student support services, and so you are running faculty meetings and trainings yourself. And in April, we wrote a virtual learning guide, and one of the sections is actually on learning guidance and how to create trauma-informed and culturally competent virtual learning. Thank you, Megan. So please check that out. It's not necessarily for classroom, but it is definitely for adult learners and for facilitators. And so that is a fantastic, well, I'm self-promoting here. I think it's been really fantastic. It's really helped me. And again, it's what we put together at the very start of COVID. So it's a helpful resource if some of you wanted those more tangible resources. Please check those out. So again, we really welcome you to join us in December. So on the 1st, Susan Barrett will be coming back and talking about how do we do the systems work around tiers 2 and tiers 3. And then on that Thursday, Vivien and Pamela will come back and talk about how to adapt specific practices, so CSET and bounce back, to the virtual world. So again, when we talk about, this was like the overarching practice around trauma-informed practices, and now it's how do we actually move that into concrete evidence-based practices for our schools. So join us back in December. Want to just give a quick promo also in December, the Pacific Southwest, that's our center. We're doing a 3-part webinar series on trauma-informed suicide systems leadership. So district, county, many of you run systems and are the humans of the systems. So please join us for that 3-part. It's going to be really fantastic, led by our colleague Angela Castellanos. And of course, if you want to actually be in discussion and not just in listening, every second Wednesday, we at the Pacific Southwest host Wellness Wednesdays with our colleague Oriana Ides, who is focusing all of the work this season on boundaries. Talk about a trauma-informed practice. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. And then you'll get more resources on the deck. I know Megan is dropping where you can get all of the work. We just want to thank everyone so much for attending. You can join our newsletter, you can join the Northwest newsletter, but we really hope that you let us know how this felt and landed for you. I know it was really, it could have felt fast for you. It could have felt like a lot for you. But again, the invitation is just to find one or two things that are going to make you stop doing something you've always been doing or start something that you haven't had the courage to do. Stop something you always have been doing or to start something that you haven't had the courage to do. We at the Pacific Southwest MHTTC, if you're in the Pacific Islands, California, Nevada, Arizona, we're here for you. So we're your TA partners. And if you're in Idaho, Alaska, Washington, or Oregon, know the Northwest MHTTC is here for you. And if you aren't in either of our regions, we can connect you with our colleagues because we want you to know that you are held and supported in the work. So again, on behalf of us, we look forward to seeing you back. We look forward to hearing your input. Vivien and Pamela are here for you as well. We got this. You're not alone. Feet on the ground. Gratitude to all of you who are working so hard to make this season feel more safe and connected and collaborative as much as possible. Be well, and we'll see you soon.